Welcome back to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm Joey Dwyer here to recap a big Sunday in Vanderbilt sports. It's just me today, and I think going to be a little more casual than your normal Vandy Sports Podcast. I think I'm a little more buttoned up on the rapid reactions, and actually wanted to do a rapid reaction for TCU, but schedule didn't play, so we're going to recap TCU, Vanderbilt's big men's basketball win over them. Vanderbilt basketball 9-1. I think the big story out of the day, though, Vanderbilt draws the Birmingham Bowl and Georgia Tech for its bowl game. Vanderbilt sits at 6-6, looking for its first winning season since 2013, which coincidentally, the last time it went to Birmingham, it was a controversial day to say the least for James Franklin. Vanderbilt had a big crowd there, and less than 3 hours away, I think a good geographical draw for Vanderbilt. A kind of a tough opponent to draw, though, I would think, for Vanderbilt. And I guess we'll kind of start there and we'll kind of work into what Clark Lee said today, things along those lines. But Georgia Tech, I think, a team that's really similar to Vanderbilt in that, first of all, the institution, high level academic institution, right, in the same region. And then you look at what they're doing in terms of their scheme and trying to capitalize on the down, right, and having a quarterback that can run it and use his arm and really leaning on that and having a captivating quarterback. Both teams that pulled big upsets, Georgia Tech with the Miami win and almost beating Georgia a week ago, going to 8 overtimes with them. And then Vanderbilt, obviously, with the Alabama win, which I think it's really capitalized on, actually kept Alabama out of the playoff with that, I would say. And I think it was really interesting to see kind of how that would all play with Alabama and SMU, but I don't know that necessarily mattered a ton. Vanderbilt's going to play Georgia Tech, and I think that's a better team than I maybe was thinking they would get. I was thinking they'd maybe get a mid-major that was really good, but they could push around a little bit. Georgia Tech certainly not that. Uh, but I guess that's where you start is saying, man, these teams are pretty similar. Georgia Tech is going to try to control the time of possession, at least throughout the first two-thirds of the season was a more explosive offensive team than Vanderbilt is. I think that explosiveness has maybe lacked a little bit at times for Vanderbilt, but both going to try to control the ball, control the down. And I think whoever can do that is going to have a better time in this game. I think Georgia Tech's running backs are not incredible. I don't think Vanderbilt's are either, though. And I think a lot of their running game is going to be predicated on the quarterback. Georgia Tech's defense, I think, is really physical up front. I do think Vanderbilt can maybe get to their corners a little bit, but again, it's not like they've got excellent receivers. So I do think the thing to watch is Tim Beck out scheme Georgia Tech because every indication I've gotten is Georgia Tech is going to run a lot of blitzes. They're going to put a lot of pressure on Diego Pavia. And if Vanderbilt can kind of dink and dunk them, they could have a real chance here. I think the weakness, at least from what I've heard on the Georgia Tech defense, is the linebacker play. And if Eli Stowers is playing in this game, which I expect them to, and Cole Spence is playing, then maybe Vanderbilt could exploit that. I think that's something that you look at as a place of potential weakness for them. And obviously a strength for Vanderbilt. Maybe they're going to bracket Stowers and try to make it really difficult on him. But I do think that Vanderbilt's going to have the advantage there. And I think Vanderbilt could put up some points on Georgia Tech. I do think Georgia Tech's defense is, man, really good. Virginia Tech, it gave up 21 points. Miami, it gave up 23. NC State, 29. Georgia Tech, 44 and 8 overtimes. Notre Dame, 31. North Carolina 34, Duke 14, Louisville 31, Syracuse 31. So it's not like they're getting run off the field, but I also think a lot of it is possessions and putting together long possessions, which they've done successfully. Another thing to watch too, a lot of those games they were playing a freshman quarterback because Haynes King uh, had a shoulder injury and really couldn't throw it all that well. He was in a lot of run packages, but the Georgia game was kind of his first, maybe the NC State game. I think it was mostly the Georgia game where he was fully back and pushing the ball down the field. So a month later, I'm going to guess that he's good to go, and Vanderbilt's going to have to deal with kind of the full Georgia Tech offense unless there's opt outs or things along those lines. But I think Vanderbilt's actually going to be closer to its normal offense, barring transfer portal guys and things along those lines. Pavia, I think he's going to be a lot healthier. A lot of it was wear and tear and things along those lines. He's not going to be 100% in a month, but I do think the 27th date versus the 20th that I think they would have gotten in the Gasparilla Bowl is going to be pretty helpful for them. This team was really banged up, and I'm interested to see how they come out early. And it's going to be a last hurrah for them because I think it is going to be a big offseason of turnover. We're going to talk about that a lot. I'm also interested to see what they can do with the team game planning for them for a month, because that is a real thing. I think Vanderbilt is its offense looked like it was almost figured out a little bit throughout the end of the season, and with Georgia Tech having a long time to prepare for them and not really having any other focuses, I think it's going to be interesting to see if Vanderbilt can do anything to counteract it. Now, Georgia Tech has been known to run some gadget type stuff offensively, and I think Vanderbilt's going to do a lot of that and maybe even show some new stuff in the bowl. So, interested to see what Tim Beck does. Diego Pavia's lawsuit. I think the guys on his side feel good, but I'm still a little skeptical of how that all plays. He treated the game against Tennessee like his last game at Vanderbilt, and that's going to be a story to monitor as well. Is that his last game at Vanderbilt? I think it certainly could be. I don't know enough about legal stuff and things along those lines. I do think it's a dangerous precedent to set to give all that eligibility to JUCO guys moving forward. But also, I think he does have a chance to win it, and you know, people around him seem confident, and I think that's kind of to be expected. But if he can win the case, I think Vanderbilt's got a lot less pressing need at quarterback throughout the offseason. Some of the portal entries are interesting, though. Nate Johnson, one of the more interesting ones, actually entered the portal as an athlete. And I wonder if the door was open to play receiver at Vanderbilt. He said he's open to playing receiver for another school. I would think that Vanderbilt would have given him that chance, but not 100% certain there. The one worth noting, I think, is Gunnar Hansen. I think a guy who's got a professional future. I thought could have been an NFL guy. At some point, I think he'll probably go up and have a successful year next year somewhere, and you could see him play in the NFL. That was a little surprising to me, but again, emphasizes the need to turn over the offensive line. Uh, Devin Lee was a portal entry that I thought was interesting, and then on Sunday, Tucker Wright, who's going to play in the bowl game. That leads us into kind of the Clark Lee presser and Darren Agu, which I think was to be expected, just with how the roster shook and how the playing time shook, things along those lines. So I'm interested to see kind of what the portal looks like moving forward with them after the bowl game. Clark Lee did say today, which I thought was a really interesting comment, that some of those were mutual. And I think that indicates, and he even kind of hinted at this, it indicates their thought of like, man, this is a business now. This is professional sports. And I think you saw that in the spring, almost like flat out releasing guys. And now in the fall and in the winter, they're kind of nudging guys out a little bit. And I think that's an indicator that they're going to have a lot of turnover again. And I think that's kind of what they want. But Clarkley's also talked about retention and retaining the right guys. And I think as you've kind of seen this go over the last couple of weeks, you've seen his emphasis on, I guess, keeping the right guys. And we're going to see after the bowl game what that really looks like. But Gunnar Hansen, I think, is the one you're really heartbroken about losing. And other than that, it's not a ton of guys that saw the field. Micah Bell was one, like Devin Lee, who not a great end to his career, but I thought he had a nice career at Vanderbilt. Nate Johnson. There's more, but those are the ones that kind of come to mind. And I don't think Vanderbilt's been completely ravaged by the portal, and that's not a narrative that I'm behind at this point. Hansen hurts, and I don't know that there's a ton else that necessarily hurts. I think they're going to improve their roster enough to where those don't hurt. And if they do hurt, then I think that means you probably didn't improve your roster enough. And I think that's Clarkley's philosophy as well. So I do think the point about Tucker Wright, Clark was asked today about, I think it was by Aria, about your guys are coming back, a lot of them, to play in the bowl game after entering the portal. And I think it also boils down to like the business thing there too, to where it's guys are doing what's best for them, but also want to be a part of this. It is interesting to think about guys turning down a month at home to play in a game that won't necessarily help them moving forward unless they get in the game, and a lot of those guys probably won't. So that's interesting to me too. That was a really good question, a really good quote by Clark. But it is interesting to me to think about some of those guys were pushed out or nudged out a little bit, and a lot of those guys are still sticking around. So a testament to what Clark Lee's built, and I think this whole year kind of is. And this bowl game, I think, could be um, a real emphasis point for this year if they win it. That would be another feather in their cap to win a bowl game and have a winning season. It'd be really a shame if the season that they had is kind of down the drain. It's not a winning season and they ended on a 4-game losing streak. I think that'd be a bit of a bummer for them, but uh, it's just kind of how it works with the talent differential, things along those lines. Things catch up to you, and we're gonna have to see what happens to Vandy football in a month. But right now, interesting, interesting time for Vandy football. Also signing day as well. I think you saw in that class that they're heading more towards the portal each year. I do think that they had a couple of guys in that class who are going to be really good players for them. Carson Lawrence, a guy that everybody and their mother tried to flip. Vanderbilt kept in the class. He went on visits elsewhere. Vandy kept him in the class. Jack Elliott, kind of the opposite story, right? The quarterback they signed in the class. His recruiting profile makes it seem like, man, he's not he's not going to be a starter. Vanderbilt was his only Power Five offer, but also, man, they believe in him. They've had him for in the class for a while. He's a winner. He's won state championships, and I do think that he is an interesting guy to follow too. I think he could be a guy who starts at Vanderbilt eventually, but also interested to see kind of how the roster plays this offseason and where does Jeremy St. Hilaire stand? Where does Whit Muschamp stand? What about Drew Dickey? Those are all questions I have this offseason, and I think the quarterback room is going to be really interesting to follow Pavia or not. Obviously, Pavia brings some intrigue, but they could, if they don't have him, they could be going into camp with another competition, or they could be going in with a high dollar NIL quarterback next year as well. I think it's a more attractive place to play now. Maybe not the most attractive offense to play in as a portal guy, but especially if you're trying to go to the NFL. But I do think there's a certain guy who can be really, really good in this system. And I'm interested to see if they have that on the roster or they don't. I never necessarily thought it was Nate Johnson. I think Nate's a good guy who's really gifted, but I just didn't necessarily see the fit, especially with how the timeline played out with the offensive coordinator situation. And I think there's a lot left out ahead of him in his career, and I'm interested to see where he goes. But Vanderbilt's got a big portal season coming up. I think Billy and I will probably talk about that on a podcast coming up, but they've got some real needs. I think we actually talked about it a week or two ago. Quarterback could be a big one. Tight end, you're gonna have to rely on Cole Spence and Cam Johnson to make leaps. I wonder if they're gonna add another tight end. I wonder if they're gonna add a running back. They're certainly gonna have to rework the O line and the D line, which both I think are position groups that really have a lot to be desired currently. Maybe not as much the D line, but you're gonna have to invest a lot in those two. I think corner they're actually okay. They've got the two FCS transfers coming back who didn't play this year, Mark Davis and Marlon Jones. But besides the point, we'll move on from that for now. I do think it's going to be an offseason where there's going to be more turnover than you'd probably think. And that's just kind of how it is now. And with the stage they're in, I actually wrote about this last week. I think it's like this could be a little bit harder for Clark Lee than I think people are kind of letting on. Not only to get back to 6 wins to exceed it, I think getting back to 6 wins is even a tall task. We talked about how hard the schedule was this year. It's going to be hard again next year. Alabama's probably going to be a little better next year, you would think, right? And I think Auburn's probably going to be better. Maybe some teams will be down, but it's not going to be smooth sailing for them. They're going to have to throw a lot of money into this thing, or they're going to have to get the right guys. And I think a lot of what made them so special this year was they got the right guys who believed what they could do, and they also got the right guys who bought in early and had chemistry together. So one last ride for those guys in the Birmingham Bowl. Going to be really interesting to see how that plays. But I think it's going to be a real test for Vanderbilt one more time. I don't think this is you're walking in and playing a MAC team. This is Georgia Tech. This is a team that is 2-0 against top 10 teams, at least when they played them. Obviously, Florida State, not a top 10 team anymore. Miami, one of them. I guess, you know what? 2-1 against top 10 teams. Georgia is the one loss, but regardless, I think Georgia Tech is a team that come out and kick Vanderbilt's butt if it's not ready to play. So we'll see how it goes, but just progress that they're getting to a bowl game, and it is worth noting the last time they had a bowl game in a winning season, it was the Birmingham Bowl. So I'll leave it there with football. I think there's a lot to talk about in the next month, but moving on to basketball, Vanderbilt is 9-1, beat TCU on Sunday. Story of the day is Jason Edwards, right? Jason Edwards averaging 19 something points a game and has scored double figures every game, is a top 10 scorer in the SEC. I've been hesitant to say it because I just want to see it a little more against good competition, but as it currently stands, Jason Edwards is a star. He stepped into stardom, and I think today was the day that you kind of saw that come to fruition. He'd been really good throughout a lot of the year. He'd been pretty consistent, especially with the volume that he shot with. He was really efficient, and I think that's something that's always kind of gone under notice about him throughout his career. But everything was on display today, right? He made the big shots. He drove by guys. He made tough threes. He made tough shots. Jason Edwards is a tough shot maker, and he's Vanderbilt's alpha, and he's one of the best players that Vanderbilt's had over the last 5 years. I don't think there's much mistaking that. There's the NBA guys, right? There's Pippen, there's Saban Lee, Neesmith, um, Liam Robbins, and then there's that next tier, and I think Jason Edwards is right in that next tier and could be one of its most productive player, even more productive than some of those NBA guys. But man, he's had an awesome start to his Vanderbilt career. I knew he would be good when he came to Vanderbilt. I think there was too much good tape out on him for him to not be good. But man, he's probably been better than I thought he would have been. You knew he was gonna be the most talented off the dribble scorer since Pippen. You knew he was gonna be their go-to guy. I don't know that I expected him to score in double figures every single game to start and to be a top 10 scorer in the league as we entered December. I mean, that's remarkable. He's been awesome. And I think he's almost made up for some of the other guys maybe underwhelming a little bit. Tyler Nickel has not been the player that I think I had thought he would be to this point. I don't think that's a lost cause or anything along those lines. I think he's coming back and going to be a good player for them, but he hasn't shown us quite as much off the bounce ability. I think that unlocking the two VT guys is going to be big for them down the stretch. Tyler Nickel and MJ Collins, both I think have way better basketball ahead of them and will be better basketball players towards the end of the year. But right now, Edwards is carrying the load. Hogard has been spotty, he's been inconsistent, but I think he's had stretches of really good play too, and that's a pretty dynamic backcourt of two old guys who know how to play. And I think a big thing I've noticed from this team too is they know how to win. TCU made that run today towards the end of the game, and Vanderbilt really just kind of kept their hand on them and kept stiff arming them away and found a way to win that game. And that's something that matters too. Like we talked about that a lot last year. That talent, the team's talent was not good, and they won 9 games. Vanderbilt got its ninth win today. I think that'll be a big deal when they pass it against Citadel. Actually, the return of Ed Conroy. But besides the point, Vanderbilt's gonna find ways to win just by nature of being old and at some point knowing how to play together. I think they're starting to get there. They're starting to move it a little bit better. Thought the offense was pretty stagnant throughout the first half today, but Jason Edwards just bailed them out time and time again, and you got to give him a lot of credit for what he did. I think Jalen Carey is still a work in progress, and he may be a little further away from being a stud than I thought he was. McLaughlin has been really good, and I think another thing too, and this kind of goes with McLaughlin's like steadying force, and it's not necessarily attributed straight to him, but man, their turnovers. Wow. Coming into the day, they were sixth in the nation in offensive turnover percentage. They've won the turnover battle in every game this year except the SEMO game, and they had 9 turnovers in that SEMO game. That was one of their lowest totals of the year. That's been a real remarkable thing for them because there's been games where the offense has been stagnant, where guys just don't seem to be on the same page, where there's been a little bit of selfish play, like Mark Byington said, but they've been fine because they're taking care of the ball and they're getting shots. And even if it's not the best shot in the world, you're getting a shot, and I think that matters. And they're getting a shot just about every time down the floor, which is a huge thing. And they're turning teams over and scoring on the fast break. You saw probably the game-defining play today was the Tyler Tanner breakaway and one layup. That was a huge, huge play. And they've had so many of those this year where they've just picked the guy's pocket and ran it down the other end and scored. It feels like more so than them getting in transition by nature of like a long rebound or getting in the passing lanes. It's just them ripping the ball out of a guy's hand and taking it down the other end. That's the thing that I wasn't necessarily expecting. Byington to talk all offseason about how they wanted to attack. They have certainly lived up to that because I think a lot of coaches say that and they don't, but they have really attacked. They are really getting after teams. They're pressing, maybe not every possession, but they're pressing. And when they're sitting in the half court, they're tougher to score on than I thought they would be to this point. TCU shot it let's see, 49% from the field and 58% from three. And Vanderbilt still won the game pretty handily because TCU turned it over so much. And Vanderbilt was able to make shots when it mattered. And it played like a veteran team when it needed to play like a veteran team. And I think it's honestly, it's kind of a cop out to say this, but I think it's been a really impressive start for Mark Byington and just the way this group has come together because I wasn't expecting them to be 9-1 at this point. I thought they would probably have two losses at this point, but they have four Power Five wins, and then their quad one win is against Nevada. So they have five good wins on their resume. I don't think Seton Hall is great. I don't think Virginia Tech's very good either. Five Power Five wins or four Power Five wins and a quad one win. Any way you slice, it's pretty good. And I think the point of my story on Sunday was they are going to be in a spot to where they're able to play meaningful basketball in February and March, regardless of what happens in January. And that's something they've set themselves up for by doing what they've done throughout the first 2 months. That's progress. I think they have a chance to make the tournament. And if they can finish non-conference play with a 12-1 record, which it looks like they will, they're going to play Citadel, who I think is better than it was last year, but still not a team that should compete with Vanderbilt. Austin P is the one to really watch. That's a team that could win the ASUN, and that's their toughest non-conference game yet, or left. Not yet, certainly not yet. But that's the one to watch. It could be a sleepy night in Memorial, and Austin P could come in there and scare them. But if they can win that game, and the New Orleans game, I think should be a better win or an easier win for them too. MJ Thomas actually, I don't know if many people remember, he had a Vandy offer, and I don't know if it was committable. And then he visited a couple of times. I think he really wanted to go to Vandy. Is at New Orleans now, is contributing as a freshman after playing Europe, I guess prep ball, right? Like I guess he was in like a grad program somewhere and up there. But besides, this is why I can't go alone, I guess, because it's just useless. Maybe not useless knowledge, but just not. We've already talked about Ed Conroy's return to Memorial. We've talked about MJ Thomas's revenge on the old Vanderbilt staff. Hey, how about Andy Fox at Army? They've won some games as well. So we'll get back to Vanderbilt currently. I think Byington has done a really nice job. And I think his demeanor on the sidelines, Stack got a lot of crap for being stoic on the sidelines, and I never really got that. I think the thing about Byington, it's not as much that it's like he's stoic, but he's not checked out, and you can tell that he's really engaged. I think he's called more sets than I thought he would. I talked to somebody from an opposing team in Charleston, and I was like, how much stuff does Byington actually really run? I was under the impression he didn't run a whole lot of stuff. And he said they've got, I'm not going to say the exact number, but they've got a number in the teens of plays that they're consistently running and probably run about every game. And they've got 20 something plays in their playbook. And that's a lot less than Stack for sure. But I do think it's more than just throw the ball over the fence. I think it's somewhere in the middle of Stack and Bryce Drew in that regard. And Byington even said it after the VT game. He said the offense was a little stagnant in the first half of that game, and then in the second half was able to get it going a little more. And he attributed that some to them being in front of his bench, and that was a really interesting kind of philosophy thing almost, to where it mattered a lot that they were in front of his bench and he had more of his hands on the offense. And I think that kind of tells you a little bit about what they're trying to accomplish. It's not just get up and down and throw up a shot. It's try to work it around a little bit, get a good look. And I talked to Ben McCollum from Drake a couple days ago and kind of talked to him about the concept of playing fast. Not in the context of Byington, but his concept of fast was more about how fast are you in your cuts and your actions and things along those lines, rather than what's your Ken Palm tempo. And I thought that was a really interesting point. He talked about how the misconception with Drake, who Vanderbilt could not beat. That's the only team that they've lost to at this point. The misconception with Drake is that they're trying to slow it down and play slow, and that's not what they're trying to do. What he said is Drake is taking shots or Drake is turning down shots that everybody else is taking. And I think Vanderbilt's willing to take those just to get more possessions in the game because they haven't turned it over much. But it is a interesting thing. I do think they're a little more methodical than people give them credit for. And he never said anything about Byington in that context. I don't think he would disagree with my thought about them being more methodical, but that was an interesting perspective to get. And he thinks that they're well coached. He seems to think they're a well-oiled machine, and they also have guys unlike what Drake has, and they should, that can kind of put the game on their back and go score. Jason Edwards is one, AJ Hogarth's another. By the way, how I don't understand how it's so hard to say AJ Hogarth. So many people have screwed that up. Before I get off, let's do a little look into box score, not necessarily for the TCU game, but Grant Huffman. I want to do a little deep dive player by player. Grant Huffman, I think, is stock up relative to where I thought he would be at this point. He's really made an impact on every game, and I thought Tyler Tanner might have pushed him out of the rotation. Huffman's a bona fide every game starter once you get to SEC play. He's always making the right play. He's not turning it over. He's getting to the line. He's doing all the, and you hate to use the cliches, but he's doing all the little things right. And I don't know if I've seen a player at Vanderbilt do that as much in the last couple of years. Maybe Jordan Wright was one of them, but Huffman makes just such an impact on the game. And it's been refreshing to see in this era of guys hunting their own shots and things along those lines. Huffman is just a complete team guy doing all the right things. I think Tyler Nickel is starting to maybe get right a little bit. I think that shot at the end of the first half on Sunday was huge for him. He just banked it in from like 40 feet. And that was a huge shot for Vanderbilt in that game. And also within the context of his season, 'cause he's got a long way to go. It's probably been one of the more disappointing guys over the first month or so. But I think there's way better basketball ahead for him. He has talked about in Charleston that he had some underwhelming performances, and I think those have continued a little bit. 5 of the last 6, I think he has not been in double figures, and that's pretty uncharacteristic, I think, as well. From what I heard in the secret scrimmages, from what I heard in the summer, I think they're expecting better from him, and you saw he could be better. I think it was the Seton Hall game as well. AJ Hogarth, just inconsistency issues. I think you can see that there is a world in which he's a great player for them. He was really good in Charleston for, I think, 2 of the 3 games, and I think he is a good player for them. I think the thing with him, and I think Byington talked about this earlier in the year, is letting the game come to him and things along those lines, and finding a balance between attacking and letting the game come to him. I'm interested to see kind of what you see moving forward for him. I think he's got the chance to be their best player, and I don't know that you've seen that fully yet. I think you're going to see it more once they get to SEC play. Chris Magnon, I think, honestly, the analytics were huge. Chris Magnon, or huge on Chris Magnon. I wasn't quite as big on him. I didn't love the tape. I don't love that he can't shoot super well and he's not really guarded out there. Um, but I think he does. He's kind of like Grant Huffman, right? He's an old guy who does the right things. Maybe not quite as frequently as Huffman, and not as consistently, but does the right things and keeps himself in the game. I think that's a big thing too. McLaughlin, I think, is another one that does the little things right. He's an older guy that knows how to play, and I don't think he's gonna average the numbers that he did against SIUE and Maryland Eastern Shore once they get to SEC play. But again, he's been a consistent double figure scorer on pretty good efficiency, and that's a story in itself that I don't think has been talked about as much as it probably should. Probably my bad. Um, but Edwards. Not much to say there. He's a stud. He's a bona fide star at this point, and I think he's gonna have to be proven otherwise for me to say anything else. He shot 14 free throws on Sunday. That was big as well. He's the guy who can get to the line better than a lot of the guys they've had to. And that was kind of my concern dropping from Scottie Pippen to the guards they had for the last 2 stack years. Is those guys didn't get to the line near as much as Pippen did. They had a big drop off there. And they're finally starting to get that back a little bit. Like I said, most talented off the bounce scorer they've had since him. And I don't expect his production to go down a ton. I think he's going to get his own shot. He can make tough shots. So even if they're playing better defense, he's going to be a player. MJ Collins, I think is his numbers are fine, but I think you're going to start to see more explosions from him throughout the year. You saw it at VT in the first half, Nevada in the first half. He was okay on Sunday, 7 points, 2 for 6, 1 for 3. I think his defense is really valuable. That's what'll get him on the court. But he's got more of an offensive skill set than anybody gives him credit for. And maybe next year's the year to show that rather than this year. But he's got a role on this team and he'll be a player. Tyler Tanner, same thing. Man, he is so disruptive. So disruptive. And that's a big thing that I've looked at and been surprised by. I talked to somebody close to Tyler Tanner, heading to Charleston, and it's like, man, I didn't think he could play defense like this. And I said, I didn't either. I watched his high school tape. I watched his EYBL tape. I didn't see it either. And I think Byington, again, a testament to what he's done, really got Tyler Tanner to buy in on that end. He's the future of the program. He's a piece that they're going to really have to value and find a way to keep. So Tyler Tanner, stock up. I thought he would play and I thought he'd be good, but I didn't know if it would be this good. He's finally starting to show a little bit of the off the bounce ability. Still not seeing exactly what you saw at BA. And I don't know if you ever will, but you're going to see a lot more of that rather than just catch and shoot like he had early in the year. He's going to be a guy who's unlocked. And I wonder if they unlock Jalen Carey a little bit more too. I think he is maybe struggling to adjust to the athleticism a little bit at this level. And I wonder how long that takes. I think next year is going to be a huge jump for him. I don't, what does that look like? I'm not sure, but I think he'll be a lot better this time next year than he is right now. I wonder what the progression looks like in the next 2 months. They're going to need him. McLaughlin's going to probably not be able to play 39 minutes at the five. They played together a little bit on Sunday, which was notable, but man, he's got some questions to answer, honestly, and he's got to hit threes too. That's a big part of his game that they haven't really unlocked at this point. And the stock report on Jalen Carey just not quite as high as I thought it would be. And they're going to have to find a way to, I mean, they need him, right? It's not like you can bench him. And I think the argument of benching him for JQ Roberts is a little futile. If you're going in with JQ Roberts as your second center, JQ Roberts is a guy who I think is capable of playing in the SEC, but I think it's going to be a more of a Chris Magnon 3-4 dirty work role than him being your backup center who's playing 20 minutes a night. I think J.Q. Roberts is a good player. I also think he's probably a year away from being a developed center in the league just because of his frame. And I mean, that's shown in the minutes, right? I don't think they trusted him a ton. There's not a huge difference between last year's J.Q. Roberts and this year's. He's a good player, but they do have some work to do. And another thing too, Alex Hemingway, that's one I wanted to note. Um, I don't think the plan is for him to come in and be a huge rotational piece. I wonder what the health looks like there. He's been available the last 2 games. I mean, I don't think the plan was for him to play a lot on the road trip, but I wonder if maybe he gets worked in a little bit more in the next 3 games. If he doesn't, I'm kind of thinking they're set with what they've got in the rotation. Byington seems to be toying a little bit, but I think he's kind of like what he's got right now. They're 9-1. They're playing good basketball, and that's kind of what it is, right? There's a guy who hasn't played with them a whole lot, and you saw it with Lipscomb with Jacob Ognosovich last year. He's probably their best player last year, but they have to play differently when he's in the game. And I don't know that Hemingway, they have to play differently when he's in the game, but it's hard to get a guy in the rhythm when he hasn't got up and down with the guys in a few months, things along those lines. That's something that I've thought about too. I think he's good enough to play, but who do you take minutes from? And does the flow of the offense still work when he's in the game? Those are the questions they've got to answer with him. The rest of the roster, Jordan Williams, I think gave him some good minutes early, but I think Chris Magnon should be taking those minutes for now. And I think Karis Bilal, from what I've been told, is probably going to redshirt. There's an injury right now, but I wouldn't expect him to be on the floor either. So that's kind of where they are. I think the rotation's pretty set. I'll read you the minutes from Sunday. Grant Huffman, 27. Tyler Nickel, 19. That was due to foul trouble, too, I think. AJ Hogarth, 17. I expect that to be more, but, I mean, they've got a lot of depth, and Huffman was the better guy today. He had 5 assists, 1 turnover. Hogarth had 4 turnovers and 1 assist. Kind of a no-brainer there, but these are the guys that are going to be playing big minutes. I think the actual minutes are interchangeable. Chris Magnon had 11. He'll probably play more in certain games, less than others. Devin McLaughlin, 28, kind of what I'm expecting. Jason Edwards, 28, maybe expecting more. MJ Collins, 24. Tyler Tanner, 27. Um, that could go down for Hogard a little bit, depending on the game. But again, a testament that they're doing that with him in a Power Five game. And we've been talking about all along. We'll see if that works in SEC play. That's a team that could beat SEC teams. Jalen Carey had 18 minutes today, and JQ Roberts had one. So those are the guys that are going to play and are going to play in volume. Magnon and Roberts, I think, are the two towards the back end of the bench. But I think that's what they're going to do unless they try to work Hemingway in against the mid majors. But man, that's where they are, and I think they're in a really good place as a team. They're playing good, fundamentally sound basketball on Sunday. The rebounding difference wasn't really there, and I think we'll talk more about this when everybody's on. But the state of Vanderbilt athletics pretty good right now. Women's basketball is really good. Men's basketball is 9-1. Football is going to a bowl game, and it's a big year for Tim Corbin and co. as well. So, good time to cover Vandy athletics and an exciting time for both the teams we talked about today. So, wanted to shine some spotlight on where those situations are now. And with me being on winter break and not being around a whole lot, hoping to get to Birmingham, but we'll see how that works. But we'll try to do this a little more often. Leave some feedback in the comments if you guys like videos like this or you want me to shut up and go back with the other guys. We're hoping to continue to do something every basketball game. I kind of cheated at this basketball game by going with the football combined show, but hopefully you got your money's worth. So, uh, yeah, I guess I'll leave it there. Heading home for winter break, so I won't be around Memorial as much. Brandon will probably do some stuff. I'm hoping to be at Citadel. I don't know how that'll work. Austin P will just be him. New Orleans will just be him. So for a while, won't be at Memorial for a while, but we'll be covering remote things along those lines. So thank you guys for watching. God bless, and if you stuck around this long, I appreciate it. We'll talk soon. Peace.